What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you if you're watching on video. I promise not from parts where I've been kidnapped. I'm in my old stomping grounds, my old office, which is now empty and vacant, and I apologize for the sound quality, the video quality. This will be a very short intro. If you're watching this for the first time, I'm sure you'll probably just skip ahead or go somewhere else. I, again, apologize for that, but wanted to record a quick update because we have the Draymond Green suspension, and I recorded a little bit on him before the news was announced. Most of it is still pertinent, but he has been suspended for Game 3. Domantas Sabonis is currently questionable for Game 3. I would expect him to play with that sternum contusion. He did finish the game in Game 2, and I don't want to belabor the Draymond Green point, but I just want to sort of reiterate it a little bit. I would not have suspended him. I hate seeing this series be decided in any way, potentially, by a player's absence. I think the ejection overall was probably enough, and so was the technical for Sabonis. He grabbed his leg. That actually happened. I know some people think he was sort of bracing his face or whatever. He grabbed Draymond Green's leg. And so I get Draymond being frustrated, and he's saying he's been grabbed all series. Domas has been fucked around with all series as well. And where I land on this is I wouldn't have suspended Draymond. I don't have an argument for not suspending Draymond, though. He stomped on him, and then he went or stepped on him, however you want to phrase it. And then he went and he was taunting the crowd at a game in which at which Adam Silver was attending. The commissioner of the league was attending. And Draymond's in the camera saying, "You gotta love this shit," taunting the fans. And I kind of appreciate the performance from him, but at the same time, you know your reputation. The league came out and said it, that your reputation factored into that. You need to be smarter. You know how important you are to the Warriors, to their defense, to even their playmaking, which Sacramento's done a good job of limiting this series. And to do that, I won't buy, heat of the moment BS. I think it's just, that's what it is. It's complete BS. You need to understand how important you are to this team, how mission critical you are to this team, and not put yourself in a position to where you might even be disciplined, even if you think it's a little bit unfair, even if you're being punished for your history, which you are because the league came out and said it. There's a different conversation to be had about them being more consistent with how they're viewing player reputations when they're doling out punishments. But Draymond Green knows his reputation. He knows his history with the league. Adam Silver was at this game, and he's just exacerbating the issue by turning it into this WWE-like performance, which, again, was great for sort of the content, but when you're this important to your team and you're down by 4 points in that game and now 2-0 in the series, and you knew you could be down 2-0 in that series, you have to be smarter. And that's where I land on it. I would not have personally suspended him. I don't think Draymond's this bad guy, but I think that what he did was, it's on him. It's ultimately on him. With that out of the way, for anyone who's stuck with us with any echoes that you hear, I apologize, or through this video where it looks like I was kidnapped, and maybe I'll explain why I am where I am on the podcast with Grant in a few days. Let's get to the actual mailbag of this episode.
What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with a mailbag podcast. Before we get started, the very quickly reminder, subscribe if you haven't done so already and you're checking us out for the first time. Hit sub on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, or both, and tell people about us. Shout-outs on Twitter appreciated, retweet our promos, word-of-mouth recommendations go a long way. And if you've not done so, join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast description as well as the YouTube description. Let's get into this mailbag. We'll be doing more of a deep dive into the playoffs overall, but I'm trying to mainline as much basketball into my veins as possible at this point, and kind of like to see, we have playoff questions, to be fair, but I kind of like to see 2 or 3 games just to get more of a feel so that Grant and I can go a little bit deeper. So expect that to drop probably around Friday. We'll get a little bit deeper into our biggest, I think we're looking at either observations or we'll do surprises, disappointments, but there's just a lot of basketball happening right now, and I'm trying to watch as much of it as humanly possible, unless at this point, I'm recording this mailbag before the Atlanta Hawks Boston Celtics game. I'll watch that a little bit, but as soon as 7:30 comes around, I'm shifting over to the Cavs and Knicks. I can't bring myself to care about the Atlanta Hawks Celtics series at this point, just because I don't really know what I'm going to learn other than that the Hawks have some work to do. So let's start here. I'm not sure if this will be a 2-parter. We had some Twitter questions I want to get to, and our Discord members get priority mailbag access as always. So be sure to join our Discord, like I said before. Our first question comes from Carrigan, who has 2, and I liked both of them, so I'm going to answer both of them. The first question coming from Carrigan is, if you're Danny Ainge and you could go back in time, would you swap Walker Kessler for Jaden McDaniels? Shit. I saw this question. I was like, this is going to be like really difficult for me. I'm going to say, no. No, I want to say yes. I would do it because Jaden McDaniels is about to get paid, but he's shown a lot more on-ball skills and plays a more a defensive position that's more in demand and does things on defense that are more in demand or more versatile than Walker Kessler, who is already one of the best rim protectors in the NBA. If you want to get into the cost aspect of it, I really do understand why you would want, okay, we're earlier into our rebuild. We have Larry Markkinen on a big deal. We did pay Colin Sexton via sign and trade. Are we going to re-sign Jordan Clarkson? Do we want this guy that we're going to have to give? Look, he's probably going to get $25+ million in his per year in his next contract. And would you rather have Walker Kessler as, okay, he's on a rookie scale for 4 years as opposed to Jaden McDaniels, who has had 2 years at the time of the trade. So he has 1 more year of cost control versus 3 for Walker Kessler. I'd still prefer Jaden McDaniels just because he's going to give you more on-ball juice on offense, it seems. And I do think the Jazz, look at what they did in offense this year, the spacing they had, you would have let Jaden McDaniels flourish. And so if that was on the table where you could have gotten Jaden McDaniels instead of Walker Kessler, I absolutely would have done it at this moment. And I think they would have done it too, to be clear. At this moment, it's a little bit tougher of a situation, but I would still do it. And the only argument against it would just be, we don't want to pay him, which I just think would be bonkers. You should absolutely want to pay Jaden McDaniels, who is a fucking absurdly good. Should not have punched the curtain that was in front of the wall, though, as we all know. Next question from Carrigan. This one did not see this coming, but I was going through it. Should the Jazz go after LaMelo Ball if it cost them salary plus both their picks this year? As of now, the Jazz are projected to land at number 9 in the lottery, and number 16 is the pick that they're expected to get from Minnesota, I believe. 9 and 16 alone is not getting you LaMelo Ball. I want to make that clear. And you're not just trading, the Hornets aren't just trading LaMelo Ball into cap space. He actually doesn't make that much money right now. He can sign a max extension this summer, but that's not going to kick in until 24, 25 anyway. And so you're looking at his money for the books next year is not even $11 million. You would have to give up. Would I give up both my first round picks this year in addition to other stuff for LaMelo Ball if I'm the Jazz? That's really the question. And my answer is it's yes. LaMelo Ball is really good, has injury concerns, but you look at the decision-making that he's able to have, or the influence, I should say, that his decision-making has in transition, his ability to get the team up and running. Guys are going to sprint harder when they're near him because they know that they'll find him. We're talking about someone who really does a nice job operating now from the point of attack. I think as a jump shooter, at least, you have questions about maybe his floater, about his ability to get to the rim, but he gives you some nice rebounding. And the fit right now, and this is what's hard. You're not giving up Larry Markkinen in this deal. The Hornets aren't going to want him. And if you're getting LaMelo Ball, you want a little bit more of an immediate timeline. I don't know if Charlotte would have interest in Colin Sexton. Those two could play together, especially if you're not bringing Jordan Clarkson back, or you just continue to make Colin Sexton your 6th man. The idea of having LaMelo Ball, Larry Markkinen, and Walker Kessler on the same team, though, makes so much functional sense that it's not even funny. Like, that is a team that has a real baseline that could do some damage immediately. And you're the Jazz. You have all these extra first-round picks floating around. And so could you get LaMelo Ball without giving up Walker Kessler? I think you could, because Charlotte, I'm not saying the Hornets are going to trade him, to make that clear. I don't think they will. But they have Mark Williams. And so, like, they even have JT Thor, who showed a lot towards the end of the season. Like, they have big man options. And again, while the Hornets have taken a bunch of swings looking at Kai Jones as well and having Mason Plumlee for a bit, they've taken swings on centers. In theory, that's among a rim protecting center. And if you want a rim rolling center or a play finishing center, that is an easier hole to fill than, like, let's get these mystery box first round picks. And so if you're the Jazz and it's flexibility, and even if they want Akbaji, who really came on later in the year for them, and they want extra picks in addition to your 2 firsts, I would absolutely look at it. You have picks to spare, you have cap space to spare. I don't think you would need to think twice about it, unless you're just, this goes back to the Jaden McDaniels discussion, you're scared of paying LaMelo Ball his next contract. And there might be a little bit more credence to that, even though LaMelo Ball has the higher ceiling than Jaden McDaniels, just because LaMelo Ball has the history of, especially with his ankle stuff. And then his contract is going to be, that's a max extension. That's Jaden McDaniels. That could end up being what it is, but that's just a max extension for LaMelo Ball. And so if you don't want to get into that business, I understand why you might be more reticent there. But that really wouldn't be a decision for me. I did want to touch upon, and since we're getting this news now, I'm glad that I waited because I saw some of it trickling out. But should Draymond Green be suspended for his light to medium to heavy stomping of Domantas Sabonis in Game 2 between the Kings and the Warriors? It does not look like he's going to be suspended per Shams Charania. Looks like he's going to be fined. He was ejected from that game. I think the factors that go into it, it certainly helps that Domantas Sabonis' x-rays on his sternum came back negative. I found it kind of hysterical that Draymond Green had requested an MRI or an x-ray, or whatever it was, on his ankle that Domantas Sabonis grabbed. My thoughts on this are not particularly complex. I saw a lot of people saying that Sabonis didn't actually grab Green's ankle or lock it in. He was just trying to cover his face. Maybe he grabbed the ankle. He grabbed the ankle. We can admit Sabonis grabbed Draymond Green's ankle. If you're Draymond Green, you have to know that you are too important to the Golden State Warriors to stomp on a player or step on a player, even if it's out of frustration, even if you think it's unfair that you got ejected or might have been suspended because of your reputation. You know your reputation. You know how you're going to get refereed or officialed. You need to be smarter than that. And I would be, if he ended up being suspended, that might cost the Warriors the series. At that point, you have to be smarter than that. This is on him more than it's on anybody else. It's, yes, I guess you could retaliate because Sabonis is grabbing your leg, but you did something that warranted very clearly an ejection and potentially raised the question of, will you be suspended? You could have yelled or something, gotten in his face where known that you would have gotten a technical rather than getting ejected. And I don't buy into this heat of the moment bullshit, because you have now been in the league for all these years. You've won 4 championships. You've cost your team 1 championship by getting suspended for that Game 5 matchup versus Cleveland in 2016. You could argue the trickle-down effect of, would they have gotten KD if they'd won that year? Yada, yada, yada. I don't know. They win 2 titles with KD. You understand how you are viewed among officials and the league. Whether it's fair or not, you have to be smarter than that under these circumstances. And I thought there was, I don't want to say restraint. That feels like too much of a compliment to Draymond in this situation, but I didn't think, and I've watched it a bunch of times, I didn't think that he and I'm motioning my foot on the floor. Even people on YouTube can't tell what I'm doing. That he kind of stopped it before Sabonis's chest. And I was just wondering if there was an overreaction from Sabonis, but you go back and watch and there's very clearly contact there. Maybe Green definitely didn't go down with his full force, but what are you doing here, man? This is just, it's outrageous to me. And to see Warriors fans, Twitter, some of them, not all of them, just still defend him. Come on. You can say, yeah, Sabonis grabbed his ankle, but this is Draymond. He punched one of your own teammates. This is not someone who's ever going to get the benefit of the doubt. And quite frankly, they're lucky he didn't get suspended. And I don't know how you watch that and don't think that even if, and it's not if, Sabonis grabbed his ankle. I'm not trying to defend Sabonis here. Sabonis and Draymond Green both getting bounced around in this matchup. It's been very physical. Sabonis has been hit hard all year, just like Green thinks he's been grabbed all series and all year as well. I'm not defending Sabonis. You locked Draymond Green's ankle, whatever. That's fairly dangerous. Green came back with an over the top reaction. And that's just to try and, I don't know, displace that blame or say it was warranted and then you're going to get an X-ray on your ankle. Come on, man. Come on. You're a fantastic basketball player. You're too important to the Warriors to be this fucking cavalier with how you're letting your emotions and your actions get the best of you. And I understand that Draymond's fire is part of the brilliance that is the Golden State Warriors dynasty, and that the chaos he can inflict both on and off the court has its value. But dude, that's frustrating as hell if I was the Warriors. So, and honestly, look, that might have cost you the game. It still could look back as sort of this flashbulb moment of, did that cost them the series? The Warriors were kind of in the middle of a rally. All the credit to the Kings who've staved off a bunch of different Golden State rallies already in this series. They were clearly underestimated. And I thought I gave them enough credit by picking the Warriors in 7 in this. I clearly didn't give them nearly enough credit. So, yeah, I don't think Draymond should be suspended just because I don't want to see the matchup defended or play out in this way where it's, Draymond misses a game and then we have to deal with all these excuses, yada, yada, yada. I don't want it to be impacted by missing players. And I ultimately probably still think the Kings would have won that game if he stays in the game. But if he was suspended, I wouldn't have a good argument other than that to say, well, this sucks. It kind of diminishes the the series, the quality of the series, or it impacts the series in a way you don't want to see it be impacted. I just, beyond that defense, there is none. Draymond just needs to be smarter in these situations, whether this is, again, him being overly officiated because of his reputation or not. It's Allen asks, will Ja Morant get the injury prone label in the playoffs narrative like Zion or AD after this? Going to be the second year in a row he's going to be hurt when Memphis is eliminated. I'm laughing because that's the phrasing from it's Allen just assuming that the Grizzlies are going to be eliminated at the hands of the Lakers, which I know you watched that game, game one, and I could understand why you might think that. So no, because it's been 2 times, and I think what's interesting here is, well, let's get into this first. So we had the dealing with a right hand issue now, and his status for game 2 is questionable, but Woj reported that it feels unlikely he'll be ready. And then I think Tim McMahon from ESPN was the one who reported that Morant just sounded completely downtrodden, was the word he used. And that can be opinion based, but that's not something that a Tim McMahon would throw around lightly. And so you almost expect him to miss game 2. Maybe we hear differently by the end of this. And then he dealt with, was it the ankle last year? No, it was a right knee last year. Yes. There's an inherent risk to the way that Ja Morant plays because his game is so prided on athleticism and just attacks towards the basket. And so maybe you have to cake in extra injury risk. To call him injury prone when we know he's missed time during the regular season and the playoffs at this point, I guess it's semi-fair, not on the level of a Zion, I'm going to tell you that much right now. Maybe not even a level on an AD because he doesn't seem to have these like run-ins. Yeah, he might end up on the ground more. You worry about his landing mechanisms when he's coming down from a dunk or just taking off from God knows where because he doesn't give a shit. Good for him on the takeoff points, by the way. That shows real, like, I want to have that type of fearless athleticism. But I would need to see this happen more. And I think, and it's like with AD, where it's fair to call him injury prone, but because it's not like the same chronic injury necessarily, it feels more like bad luck happenstances. But for Ja specifically, I would probably need to see this happen again, and I don't want to see it happen again. But like he would have to miss another chunk of next season and then get hurt in the playoffs in one of the next 2 years to start thinking like, oh, is this going to be the new normal for him? I do think, just like it was always sort of fair to question about Zion, is his prime window shortened just because of how prided on athleticism he is and just his body archetype being so unique? It could be fair to have that discussion about, well, is there the same concern with Ja Morant because his game is so predicated on athleticism and explosion? And there's real IQ there, and he's made defenses pay when they can go under on screens against him. I don't think this is going to be a Russell Westbrook situation where once he's sort of ebbing on the athleticism front that we just see his career sort of deteriorate. And Russ, by the way, can still be really explosive, but it would just be too soon for me to go the injury prone route just now. Maybe should we say like injury prone adjacent, or we have injury concerns with Ja Morant? That feels more fair to me, or fairer. That feels fairer to me. Next question comes from Braden, and they ask, give us your game 1 overreactions or early season playoff overreactions. Again, we're going to do a pod more on this, and I'm not going to include the Suns in this just because I'm about to talk about them in a second. Someone specifically wants hot takes or overreactions to the Suns specifically. Some of this is going to change because there's going to be 3 game 2s being played on Tuesday night. I don't care. I'm going to give you the rundown hopefully fairly quickly of my overreactions based off 1 or 2 games of seeing these teams. And I have seen every single game 1 in full. And I missed part of Philly, Brooklyn. I've not gone back and watched it in game 2, but I saw most of that one. And then I saw all of the Warriors Kings game 2. I've obviously not seen any of the game 2s again taking place on Tuesday night. Phoenix, LA, Boston, Atlanta, Knicks, Cavaliers. So my overreactions are as follows in no particular order. Number 1, I would trade RJ Barrett into someone's cap space this summer if I'm the Knicks. That's probably not the right overreaction to have after his game 1 where he was pretty solid defensively, but I don't see it on offense anymore. And if you're moving forward with Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, yeah, I just don't. And that contract's going to look like an albatross now. I would absolutely do it if a team's willing to. And I'm sure you get something else in return, but I'm saying you don't need to view RJ Barrett as a blockbuster magnet anymore. That's like the more level-headed take. I think there might be a discussion. I've had this off air with some people. Maybe this is when you look at moving Julius Randle, but that's just not how the franchise thinks. That's where I'm at with RJ Barrett. Austin Reeves, this is the Lakers, is getting a poison pill from the Jazz, Pacers, or Magic, who can create some cap space. He'd be a good fit there. His poison pill looks something like 4 years and $100 million. The way it works is he can get non-taxpayer mid-level money in year 1 and year 2, and then his salary can jump to his maximum in year 3 and 4. Basically, that's how you get the Lakers to think twice about matching. Do I really believe that one of those teams is going to come over the top with the full max? No, but could I see one of these teams crafting the poison pill, knowing how cheap LA has been in the past with their free agents? Yeah, I absolutely could see it. And he deserves it. He's a primary ball handler down the stretch of game 1 for the Lakers. He made some big shots. Someone who's a wing can hold up fairly well on defense, and has just brought a ton of energy to the Lakers. And look, LeBron knew it from day 1, right from the first practice, that he was going to be more than a two-way player. That's not a lie or an overstatement at all. For the Warriors, Jordan Poole needs to be traded. I know that he's dealing with a bum ankle. I just don't see it anymore. There are games like game 2 where you need to have good Jordan Poole games because teams are throwing, I want to say the kitchen sink at Steph, but we've seen everything from the Kings use, okay, De'Aaron Fox's athleticism against Steph. We saw box and 1. We saw them blitz him. We saw them change the pickup points. They probably did a trillion other things that I'm not smart enough to spotlight. And then you need a good Jordan Poole game because you're forcing everyone else to create. We just don't get it from Jordan Poole. It's almost just like he has the most turbulent peaks and valleys in the entire NBA. And I don't see him as being an integral part of any of the timelines for the Warriors at this point. That's just where I'm at. And look, his highs are highs, but his lows are just too low for me. For Denver, the Nuggets will win the West while never seeing a game 7. That's the benefit of playing this sad sack version of the Minnesota Timberwolves we saw in game 1. Whether I truly believe that is a different story, I might be overcorrecting we caught a lot of shit. We picked Nuggets in 5, both Grant and I, against the Wolves. We caught a lot of shit because I said something seems off in Denver. And so many fans are just like, yeah, they were just sort of, schlepping their way through the end of the season. They didn't have anything to play for. This wasn't a big deal. Maybe that's true. With the things that Michael Malone was saying and just how poorly they played in some instances, I didn't buy it in full. Maybe I'm wrong. It felt like something was amiss, but let's see how they hold up against teams who aren't the Timberwolves this version of the Timberwolves. That being said, my faith in my title pick never wavered completely, but it might be not it's definitely not at an all-time high because I've felt pretty good at different points this season, but it's unflappable at the moment. I've probably wavered a little bit as the season's gone up and down, and especially after the Kevin Durant trade in Phoenix, but it's unflappable right now. For the Cavaliers, they fucked up letting Kevin Love go or not adding another playable big to their rotation. They got absolutely destroyed on the offensive glass by the Knicks, and their one big lineups with that have had issues all season, whether it's just Jared Allen or just Evan Mobley. That's probably the biggest knock against Mobley right now is he's not super brawny, and I picked him as my defensive player of the year. I have #no regrets for that, but you're going to give up strength against even someone like a Mitchell Robinson or an Isaiah Hartenstein. Like Mobley could just be tossed around a little bit more, and also someone like the same could probably be said for Jared Allen. And Mobley's going to be spending a little bit more time away from the basket, whether it's defensive rebounding or offensive rebounding as well. I think Kevin Love could have probably helped them in this matchup and wouldn't have been, the Knicks can kind of mismatch hunt, but the speed at which they play a lot of the time, unless you're putting him against their all bench units. And again, we're not even going to see a ton of those that are looking to jack up the pace because Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle are going to play a crap ton of minutes. I think that the Cavs are really going to end up, and some people might immediately point to, well, look at how much they struggled with their 3 rotation. Karis LeVert will be better. They'll be able to get better minutes from an Isaac Okoro. Maybe we'll see more of Danny Green. Jetty Osman had some strong minutes for them. They just have no perfect solutions, but they have a bunch of solutions. So I'm just sticking with that. For the Bucks, Brook Lopez might be the most underrated player in the NBA, which is saying something because he's probably going to finish second or he did finish second in Defensive Player of the Year voting. My other hot take would be he might get $25 million per year, which is wild in free agency, which is wild to say as someone who's age 35. But his rim protection, the base defense that he gives the Bucks, it is scaled to minutes without any of the stars on the court. And he is so important to what they do offensively, not just because of his ability to spread the floor, but the stuff he can do from the block, even when dribbling from the outside in. The Bucks need to find a way to get him more touches, every sort of touches in game 2, especially if Giannis is in full bore because he's dealing with that back injury, that back contusion that kept him out of a good chunk of game 1. For the Clippers, let's stick with big men. Avicii Zubac needs more scoring touches here. If DeAndre is going to defend like this, which is to say very minimally to not at all, like I'm not saying you need to throw it to Avicii Zubac on the block against him, but like let's get him involved in more pick and roll actions and throw him the ball more on rolls. Like get him moving downhill. Your team can use the extra rim pressure anyway. And I thought they went away from him a little bit too much in the second half of game one. And I'm interested to see how they go about it in game two. This is going to spill into my son's overreaction, but I want to make sure that I give due credit to people who ask questions about them. That's, I guess, just not mission critical, but like when you don't know what offensive performance you're going to get from Russ or even a Norman Powell on a game-to-game basis, and you try it out on Thailand, and that's not necessarily working from an efficiency perspective, it feels like Zubac, because of his rebounding and because of what he could do as just a finisher out of the pick and roll and the screens he could set, that's one of your best courses towards efficient offense, aside from just giving it to Kawhi Leonard and telling him to go. But yeah, that would be my Clippers overreaction. My other overreaction might just be that Terrence Mann is potentially one of the 5 most underpaid players in the league after his extension kicks in, when he's making basically mid-level money after this season. Dude is good. And I still don't understand why it took so long to kind of iron out his spot in the Clippers hierarchy. And I think you could even argue that, well, is it even ironed out right now? He didn't even play 25 minutes in game one, if I remember correctly. So we love Terrence Mann on this podcast is basically all. I don't want to speak for Grant, but I'm going to speak for Grant. We love Terrence Mann on this podcast. For the Celtics, Derek White has all-star potential still. He made my second team all defense. I did read that Zach Lowe had him on first team all defense, that's wild. Not like in a bad way, but that's the type of season he had. And he's just become more aggressive offensively, shot the hell out of the ball from 3 this year. He was ultra aggressive against the Hawks. And I feel like if we rewind this like a year to last year, he just wouldn't have been this free flowing and fluid on offense. And this is someone who I feel like, you know, he could have a 20 points per game season, just playing entirely within the flow of the offense. And if you're going to do that while playing all defense level defense, you have all-star potential in you. And so do we get to the conversation of, is Derek White Boston's third best player? I thought that didn't feel spicy enough, because there's Tatum and Brown. And then I guess if you want to go RW3, is that really the argument in front of White or Brogdon? Those are really the Smart, Horford. Those are all players with cases. I don't know if any of them are particularly strong. So I'm going with Derek White has all-star potential still. If I set the over-under on the number of all-star berths, appearances that Derek White makes in his career at 0.5. So we're saying we'll make 1. Let's just take the over here. Let's just be really spicy. Atlanta, my takeaway for them is they need to start planning for their offseason. My actual overreaction would be, can they get weird? There's like, let's throw Clint Capella on Marcus Smart. So I would say Derek White, but just sort of like Derek White's too good to go against Clint Capella offensively right now. Or do you just skew the complete opposite direction? And some of their 5-out lineups had worked, and that's going to force them into more 3-point volume. I don't like the idea of having both Onyeka Okongwu and Clint Capella on the bench, and we all know how we feel about John Collins at the 5 lineups, but throw them out there with DeAndre Hunter and DeJounte Murray, Bogdan Bogdanovic, and Trae Young. They'll have better shooting nights, and Trae talked about their need for 3-point volume. Get fucking weird. Like, this is just, you're not even, I don't want to say it's found money. No one expects you to win this series. You're not going to win this series. Just try it. I would like to see more of that. With, again, key lineups. Like we saw a little bit of it with like bench stuff, and maybe do you count DeJounte Murray as 5 shooters in 5? Like I would still get there. He shot well enough from 3 during the regular season. For Miami, I want to see them, and this is, I guess, it's not an overreaction in theory, but it is because of what it would mean for Bam Adebayo. But Miami needs more Jimmy +4 shooter lineups. Some of those were just really, really effective against Milwaukee, and it came down to, Gabe Vincent and Max Strus were hitting their threes, but just, it makes so much sense with the rim pressure Jimmy can provide, and what he's going to do with the ball in his hands and how he can take advantage. If you have spacing, he provides more of it by getting in to the lane and forcing defenses to collapse. It's a little bit harder to do with Bam Adebayo there, and defenses since the end of the All-Star break have been game planning for Bam Adebayo more on offense. I'm not telling you to pull Bam. Maybe it's more of, hey, let's go Bam +4 shooters as well when Jimmy's on the bench. You need to lean into that. And so that means playing a bunch of Max Strus and then figuring out, okay, who are our shooters without Tyler Hero? And that does get a little finicky. Should Kyle Lowry play more in game 2? I mean, maybe. I think it really means like Strus and Vincent and then Kevin Love needs to be on the court, and then you flesh it out from there. It's all right. We need to roll the dice on his Caleb Martin count as a shooter. He was 2 of 3 in game 1. Or again, do we get like good Kyle Lowry games? I don't think this is going to be a Duncan Robinson series. Their rotation is going to be so compact that the options are so few and far between. But it's maybe we need to stagger Jimmy and Bam like even more during the post, which sounds like just batshit bonkers, and it might be. But that was where they found some of their like biggest success against Milwaukee, is they had these lineups where it was Butler and just 4 shooters out there. And again, I'm not advocating to play Bam Adebayo less. And he had 4 fouls, so he finished with under 33 minutes. But those are lineups that I can see really working for Miami. But let this be a lesson for how you kind of flesh out the roster leading into next season if you're going to make moves on the trade market and what you're looking for in free agency. I thought about they need to sort of uncork Victor Oladipo in this, but I really don't see it. I don't think Milwaukee is a Victor Oladipo series, and Eric Spoelstra seems against it. How many teams we got left? In Minnesota, they should see if Dallas is willing to take Rudy Gobert still in a trade. He's been super slow in a bunch of matchups. Maybe he's still dealing with back stuff, but I don't need to see, and he made one of them against Denver, but it was in garbage time at that point. I don't need to see him put on the put the ball on the floor and spin into the hoop or into the defender. It's awkward. And I just don't see it. There's been too many adjustments already that you've needed to make to, create this ecosystem around Gobert. I don't know that he maximized it anymore. And Karl-Anthony Towns is the better player, even if you think his swings are worse. And there's probably a way to, if you want to go still the dual big route, hey, Naz Reid is here, still going to be a free agent, will be cheaper than Gobert, or you can find someone who at least protects the basket for a lot cheaper than Gobert. My final one before we get to the Suns, Sacktown is underrated on defense. Look at what they've done in this Golden State series. And we've talked about it on this podcast. They had good fundamentals all year. They rebound the basketball. They hit the defensive glass. They don't foul a ton because their offense is so good. They focus on getting back in transition. Now they focus more on offensive rebounding, which they did punt on during the regular season. They focus more on it against the Warriors, which makes sense because they're undersized. And if you're going to disrupt Sacramento's half court offense, if you're missing more shots, you want to create those second chance opportunities. So I get that, but like they've thrown a ton of different shit at Steph Curry. They've made Draymond Green really uncomfortable as a passer throughout this series. Davion Mitchell's been able to stay on the floor offensively, especially in game 2. I think you look at the job that Harrison Barnes has done for the most part. Even Fox, like his athleticism has just held up on a bunch of possessions in the series. And when I mean underrated on defense, do I think that they're a top 10 defense is currently constructed? No, I would still say they're in the bottom 10, but they're like, can we talk about what a game changer it would be if they got I'm not even saying an OG Anunoby, like a Royce O'Neal on this team, how much of a difference that would make. So that's where I'm at with them. Philly's overreaction. But let me go to Brooklyn's overreaction. And I don't know if this is overreaction so much as just stating facts. I guess they're better built to defend Joel Embiid than I thought. They've thrown a bunch of doubles at him. Kudos to Royce O'Neal, speaking of him, for the resistance that he put up against Joel Embiid in game 2. Embiid still had this wild line. He was fantastic on defense, just like 20 points and 7 assists or whatever. But he had a bunch of turnovers. He would have had so many more shots, so many more points, so many less errors if Royce O'Neal just wasn't throwing his body on him. And I think you have to give the Nets a lot of credence for the way that they've defended Embiid, despite being like they skew smaller regardless. And then like one of their primary bigs, Nicholas Claxton, like he's not super burly. He's rail thin. And so you look at the job they've been able to do on Embiid, who still had a good series. It could be so much worse if you didn't even Cam Johnson, like if you just didn't have Mikal Bridges. We know what he can do as a help defender. And so I've been impressed. And I would say that Brooklyn's better built to disrupt Philly's offense than I kind of thought, or at least the Embiid element of Philly's offense. For the Nets overreaction, I don't really know what to take away from this. I'm trying to I don't feel like super passionate about anything of the Nets right now. Let's just say that Cam Johnson's going to get $25 million a year in restricted free agency from them because he's been instrumental in the series. I think he's kind of reminding us that he's more mobile on defense than his build suggests, or than you would think of someone who's mostly a one position player. Like you're not going to play him at the 3. You're probably more likely to play him at the 5 than the 3. Maybe not on a team that skews positionless like the Nets can with all their rangy wings on the roster. But that might shock some people. I think his sticker price in free agency is going to end up shocking some people, and maybe it won't, but he's really good. And I say that he's been outscored. The Nets have been outscored by 24 points when he's been on the floor this series. I believe if I missed any team, I'm sorry, I'm just fatigued from it. But that's where I'm at. I did miss the Suns, which is who I'm going to get to, because Rome 8180 asks, I want to hear your Suns overreactions specifically. And then we also have Swag saying, is it an overreaction to believe they will burn out with the lineups Monty puts out? That core four is going to lack a lot of minutes and mileage, and they don't have great help. To answer Swag's question first, I'm pluralizing it. I don't mean to. I don't think that's an overreaction, because you had Kevin Durant playing 45 minutes in game one. You had Devin Booker playing 43 minutes. That's just, I don't, it's untenable if you want to get through the entire playoffs. It's just not, like, I get some guys average 40 minutes. Durant's still kind of working his way back from injury, though. And you kind of just, given the bad luck he's had, you're almost sort of leaving a lot to chance. I know it's the playoffs. I know that you have to leave everything on the table, so to speak, in cliche language, but geez. I don't want to see Kevin Durant playing 45 minutes in the first game of a round one series, no matter how close it is, if it doesn't go to overtime. So no, I don't think that's an overreaction. And they only had, looking at it now, actually, I didn't realize this in real time. They had 6 players log more than 8 minutes. And like, you need to, I know I'm talking about, you shrink your rotation, and Cam Payne's injury, dealing with knee stuff, that's a big part of it. So I think he would go a long way, but you got to find someone else other than Landry Shamet, who you trust off the bench. My overreactions for Phoenix, this is not an overreaction, by the way, but why are we being so hesitant to play Josh Okogie in this series? I kind of understand after watching the way that they used Torrey Craig against Kawhi Leonard, and then what he was able to do on offense, why they started him. I know that a lot of the Timeline podcast was, they weren't necessarily against it, but they want to see Okogie start. I think in game 2, the dude just needs to play more than 7 minutes. Just because of what he gives you defensively. He can help with your offensive rebounding. We've seen that be a slog. We've seen the half-court offense be a slog for you in that game 1 against the Clippers, who they're able to switch, and they just have more bodies they could throw at you than I think we credited. And Kawhi was, again, spectacular. They have Terrence Mann. Russ came up with some huge defensive moments. So just play Okogie, and hopefully that you'll figure it out on offense. And even if your offense isn't perfect, like, you still have the bailout option of Kevin Durant. I want to have an overreaction of they don't use Kevin Durant enough, but Zach Lowe said this on his podcast. Kevin Durant ran 25 pick and rolls, I think, in game 1, which is basically like a high since he joined Phoenix. It might have been a high for a season. You want to see him involved a little bit more in crunch time. I think he only had like 2 real possessions over the final 3 minutes. That's not a super spicy take. My actual take here, and I don't know if it's spicy enough, like, can we play Bismack Biyombo more over DeAndre Ayton if he's going to give you, next to 0 thrust on the glass, or even just sort of like as this defensive resistance at all? Maybe that was more of a game plan from Monty Williams, where you didn't want to see him be more aggressive playing higher, but at the very least, like, Biyombo is going to clean up more of your misses on the offensive glass. It feels like at this point, he's going to roll harder to the basket. And I also like the idea of, I think you could probably bring him out higher if you wanted to. I don't want to say if I love the idea of that, but like, we've seen him come out higher in certain instances, and it's worked. And so why is this, Suns fans, if you're listening, you can answer this for me. Why is this? I know they've toggled between Landale and Biyombo. Neither of them logged a ton of minutes. They combined to log like 12 minutes in game 1. Why is this more of a Landale series than a Biyombo series would be my question. I'd start trimming the shit out of DeAndre Ayton's minutes if you get another performance like you did in game 1 from him. And I know you might be more inclined to go Kevin Durant at the 5 there. Yeah, all right, like, fine. As long as that doesn't involve like too much of Ish Wainwright at this point, who he ended up being a disaster in his minutes there. You can explore that, but this is a Bismack Biyombo series. That is my overreaction to this, is that this needs to be a Bismack Biyombo series for the Phoenix Suns, even if it comes at the expense of DeAndre Ayton's minutes. This might age, it might sound fucking stupid now, but it might age incredibly poorly based off what happens in game 2. Maybe I'll get lucky and it ages incredibly well, though. I don't know if that was necessarily the shortest way to go through my overreactions of every series, but I think I covered all 16 teams. If I forgot your team, it's because I hate your team. This is a fascinating question from Glad. They ask, why can't the refs let games be played this physical throughout the regular season? Obviously, the intensity isn't like this, but I don't like how they pretty much call the game completely different. I'd be very curious to see, and I tried to find them. I haven't seen anything concrete about studies being done with regard to how games are called differently in the playoffs. I do agree with you, though. The intensity isn't ratcheted up this high. I think part of it is also we're not used to seeing all the best players available all at once, and some of these lineups and players so many heavy minutes. But I think they're just going to let more stuff go. And I don't know that this is a mandate, but they're going to allow games to be more physical because you're not trying to preserve or safeguard players against necessarily disaster at this point because the season's over after this. And that treats players more like chess pieces. And so I hate framing it that way. But I just wonder if that goes into the calculus, or you want to make there's that. And then you want to be even more sure that you don't become a primary driving force behind the outcome of a game, where you don't want a foul call to determine why this playoff game was won, or in Draymond Green's case, a suspension or an ejection to determine why a game was won. There are undeniable instances like Draymond Green stomping on someone's chest where you have to maybe make those decisions. But I'm wondering if that goes into it all. But I also just think that the game is being played at such a higher level. The execution overall might be better. You have players, your best players on the floor for longer stretches and just more in general through more games. And so is that going to make it so the officials aren't going to have as huge of an impact on the game? Or like I said, is this just an edict? It's the playoffs and it's understood. It's the unwritten rule of we're going to let them be more physical. And I think we've seen it kind of like on how they're calling charges, which is, it's also interesting. There was the debate cropped up on Twitter again, ban the charge versus not ban the charge. I fall in the middle of this. I think it's very weird for people to go, well, what about the offensive ratings being at 150 by banning the charge as a response to people who just want to see star players not get injured? And we saw two of them get hurt in these instances, including Giannis during the first week of the playoffs. I'm not going to fault people who want to ban the charge because they want to make sure that players are healthy and preserve player safety. There are functional implications of it, though. I'm not team ban the charge. I'm team like change the rules of the charge to where there's more. Rob Mahoney had tweeted this from The Ringer, fantastic writer, about why is there not more of a landing zone for drivers specifically like we have for shooters. And then there's still a lot that would be open for interpretation, but I think that we need to change or remove the incentives of players coming in at the last minute and undercutting guys who are on drives or leaving their feet. You can't ban the charge because I do agree that would have a major impact. This is already an offense first league and it would skew even further in that direction. But I also understand the reaction where if it was an either or scenario and the NBA refuses to kind of open things up for interpretation more or change it, adjust it a little bit, and it's just all or nothing, I get why people want to ban the charge. And so I do get the concerns that come out of that. But if you have to keep the charge as is rules versus banning it, I'm probably going to lean towards banning it because I'm just going to want to see, I'm going to want to prioritize player safety. And I don't think this is one of those instances of, well, that's addressing an issue that doesn't exist. It's an issue that does exist. And we saw it in the first round. We've seen it in the first round of the playoffs already, just through a handful of games. I wish I had a better answer for you, Glad, on why refs are allowing the game to be played more physical. I just honestly think that it might be sort of this unwritten rule is you want to try and keep things under control in the regular season because you don't want there to be this long-term cost of letting the game be so physical versus also once you get to the postseason, it's just, well, we don't want to insert ourselves into the outcome of this game more than we absolutely have to. Ian has this question, which I find fascinating because I personally wouldn't consider it a question. And to be clear, Ian's basically asking a question off of something he heard. The mismatch pod just talked about how impressive it was that the 76ers held the Nets to 84 points. I didn't watch the game, but my first thought was when I saw the score was how the hell did the Nets hold the Sixers to under 100 points? I'm with you, Ian, as someone who watched most of that game. I missed the first quarter and a half. From the Nets perspective, first looking at their offense, why are you shocked? I know that in theory they have all these wings and they have a bunch of shooters on the team. They were 23rd in points scored per possession after Mikal Bridges' debut. They were 16th in half court efficiency, which I think is actually pleasantly high for having such a dearth of creators, but they don't really look to run, and they have a dearth of creators. There's Mikal Bridges and Spencer Dinwiddie, and that's it. You're not trusting anyone else to operate off the dribble, and we've seen Mikal Bridges be overstretched as a playmaker during the regular season and in this series. That's going to be the next part of his evolution is, can he become someone who can survey the defense, make the right pass, not making sort of these last second 11th hour kickouts. So it doesn't shock me that Philly, because you can look at the problems Philly has had with their transition defense at points this season. The Nets aren't really looking to run either. So I'm not shocked at all that the Nets would have a bad offensive outing against the Sixers, especially when Joel Embiid is such a massive human who is just really keyed in on defense right now. I'm more impressed by what the Nets did defensively. That they made life hell on Joel Embiid. They've made life somewhat difficult on James Harden, and it's been at the expense of, we'll let Tyrese Maxey try and beat us, or Tobias Harris. Tyrese Maxey had a great game too. He was a lifeline for the Sixers, kept them afloat when it looked like they were going to lose. But I'm more impressed by, yes, the Nets have a lot of good defensive players. And I think even when you're looking at, okay, perimeter stopping power in general, they're not a team on paper that's built to make life difficult on Joel Embiid. They're really not. And they did in game 2. And so your first thought, Ian, to me was just absolutely correct. I am more impressed by what the Nets did defensively than what the Sixers did. And that's not to discredit what the Sixers did, but the Nets offense has not been world beating during the Mikal Bridges era. And why would it be relative to what they're coming off of, which is when they had KD and Kyrie Irving, and now they have neither of them. Next question comes from Unbiased Pistons Fan. They ask, what archetype of player will be overdrafted as a result of this past season? Like the small ball fives after Golden State, or the 6'6" athletic scorer after MJ and Kobe. I have not delved enough into draft coverage to see what players would even be available in this vein. I do know there's a lot of 6'6", 6'9" guys that are peppered up and down throughout the lottery when you're going through mock drafts. I would think, though, if there's like an archetype that's going to be targeted, I'm wondering if it's wing type players or small type players who can set screens. Because when you're looking at, and we saw this in the Suns Clippers game, if you're going to try and stash a big on like a Torrey Craig, you're just throwing him in the screening action. And I don't know if you consider Torrey Craig a good screener before now. He's not something he did a ton for Phoenix. But can you get those wings who, yes, it's probably only in the slot. I would say you're either taking a swing later in the draft or you're just looking for a role player. You're not going to do that at the top of the draft. But if you're looking to round out a rotation and you see someone who, okay, maybe we're not sold on their shooting. This is someone who we might see bigs cover so that they can roam or that they can do more on defense. Well, we're going to counter by putting them in the action as the screener because that's going to force the switch. But we also need them to be able to make plays out of that. They not only need to screen, but like, can they roll to the basket, finish through contact, make things tougher on that? It'd be ideally if you're just this like really fantastic screener who can pop and then, punish drop coverage. Your guys are going to go under screens for sure when you're just popping out. But I'm just wondering if that becomes more of some, as we get into I don't know if the NBA is more mismatch driven than ever, but when you're looking at how many teams look to try and punish mismatches, and we saw it in the game 1 in particular of the Kings Warrior series, the Kings have not run, and hat tip to NBA Einstein, who had a fantastic thread about this on Twitter, but the Kings were not a pick and roll team. They run a lot of dribble handoffs like during the regular season. Golden State was able to do some things to really blow those up, as I think everyone expected. They went to the pick and roll, which they can do because they have De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis is a great screener, but it was with the goal of putting Kevon Looney into those actions. And so like they're forcing mismatches. I think Kevon Looney probably did a better job, and the Kings just had some really tough finishes against him in game 1. And that a lot of the issues were at the point of attack for the Warriors. But that's also part of it, is that if you think you're going to blow up the Warriors' point of attack defense more by going to a pick and roll, and if they're not going to have GP2 on the court during those situations, I just wonder if that's something we could see. And I might be wrong here. I still think that the league, despite the failure in Toronto, is just going to look for wings that can create and play and defend multiple positions. But I'm just wondering if that's a wrinkle we see thrown in when you're either taking flyers, whether it be on two-way guys, undrafted guys, or later in the first round. Maybe you're just looking for someone to round out the end of your rotation. I could see that being just the next trendy frontier, is we need these wings or smalls who can not only screen really well, but then make plays out of those screens, maybe going towards the basket, to keep these defenses on tilt, who are going to try and change things up to make life easier on their bigs, or just defensive, I don't want to say liabilities, because I don't view Zubac necessarily as this huge liability. He can be, but you're not going to be, we want to make it harder, even against our offensive liabilities, to stash players, for you to stash players from your team. Food for thought there. Let me know your answers in Discord, anyone who is actually listening to this podcast. This will be our last. It's 2 questions, and they come from Rome 8180. And so we'll get to this element of it first. This may have to wait because it may require some prep. Rest assured, Rome, I did some though. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the greatest win-win trades of all time, and where the Sabonis-Halliburton trade will rank if Sacramento wins a series or 2. Bonus points for trades that weren't blow it up. scenarios. Real Syrup 2219 also says, related to this, last night during the Kings game, I was wondering if teams should worry less about winning the trade and more about making their team better. The Kings are undoubtedly better this year, even if some people think Halliburton is better than Sabonis or Fox, or will be better than Sabonis or Fox. So this is fascinating. I think I will caution that as someone who does a lot of trade reactions, I will say that I think we're too quick to jump on judgments for trades where these things can play out. And I said this in Discord, look at the interpretation of the Kristaps Porzingis trade to Dallas when it first happened versus what it is now. Most people thought the Knicks lost that deal, didn't think they searched hard enough for a high enough asking price. And then it became, oh, the Mavericks really fucked up there. So we need to let these things marinate. And the Sabonis Halliburton trade is one of those specifically, because even if the Kings' goal was getting better now, their ultimate goal was not just, hey, let's win a series. You want to view this over the longer term. If a trade is going to be won in a single year, it's because it would be because the Kings won the title or came out of the West. If they reach an NBA Finals with Sabonis this year in this 1 year, maybe you could even stretch it to conference finals based off their history. That trade is absolutely worth it. What I think makes the trade more debatable now in a good way is that what the Kings are doing feels sustainable. They're not especially old. They're not, their draft asset well is not stripped, even though they owe the 2024 selection to Atlanta. So they have, and they're not in cap hell yet. They can have cap space if they don't want Harrison Barnes this year. They're also going to have access to a non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So they still have plenty of mechanisms that can help them improve their team. Bites at the apple when it comes to the draft or trades. That's why and I panned the trade when it happened. I didn't think Fox and Sabonis were going to be a good fit. I was wrong. So I do think we have to look at trades, all of them really, through a more gradual lens than we do. But I also recognize part of the business model, including what we do on this podcast, is we want to provide those reflexive reactions. I enjoy trying to figure it out and thinking about how player X is going to fit on team Y or with player Z on his new team. I really do enjoy that aspect of this business. But I think what Real Syrup gets at, it is interesting, is that there probably are moves that are not made because you're afraid of looking like a dumbass, or it would be the unpopular move at the time. You have to kind of credit Monty McNair for making what you had to know was going to be a wildly unpopular trade amongst your fans. And it was initially. The Kings fan base is generally very welcoming of new players, and there are a lot of people that came out in defense of it and understood the logic, but they weren't happy about it. So you have to credit Monty McNair, because public perception does factor into how NBA front offices think. I know that for a fact. It does not, a front office stumbling across my fake trades piece. No, that's not going to have any bearing on their thinking. But they weigh that into their decision making. How big, how much of a share does that account for? That's going to depend on the front office. So I do think, to Real CEO's point, that front offices should be a little bit more risk inclined, which is why let's look at, I'm not complimenting them for this, but if the Hawks really did not believe in Luka Doncic and they thought Trae Young was their guy, that's a gutsy trade to make. Now, why didn't the Kings get the same treatment of, well, hey, they drafted Marvin Bagley instead of Luka Doncic? That takes guts. And that went against prevailing consensus. It's not always going to work out. Sometimes you're going to get burned by it, but you can't. And by the way, Luka Doncic would have been the safer pick. I think their whole stigma against European players, that they can cost you your job and you're going to look back and say, oh, you never should have taken them. No, he was kind of like a no-brainer at the time to me. That would have been the safer pick. You could justify that easier than the Marvin Bagley pick. And that was not this Kings front office. I know that. I understand that. And part of the reason that wasn't this Kings front office is because that pick was made in the first place. Anyway, so I agree that teams need to be more risk inclined. And I also think, though, that we need to understand what a team's goals might be. Because as Real Syrup saying, you need to focus on making your team better. What does that mean? Because I'm not going to tell anyone how to fan as an NBA fanatic. And I'm not going to tell I tell franchises all the time how they should build their team. I'm someone who is a big believer in aiming for the middle, even the top of the middle long-term without a clear path upward. It's not sexy to me. It doesn't do it for me. And so you need the clear path to contention. And so if you're making a trade just to get better and be more competitive, there needs to be a path forward. And part of my problem with the Kings was I didn't see that path forward even if this worked out. I do now, based off some of the things I've outlined in this podcast. So I'm wrong all the time. This is just one of those instances. This is also a trade we'll have to reevaluate more again in the future. I'll be fascinated to see where it lands 3-5 years down the line. But one playoff berth, unless it's, I'll go Western Conference Finals appearance, that doesn't, absolve the Kings of, oh, we don't even have to think about what happens next. Like, this trade was a home run. But yes, as of right now, it looks like a win-win because we need to factor in the franchise's goals. The Kings' goal, or at least I'm going to assign this goal to them, was that it should have been, we want to get better now while still maintaining our clear path, or even simplifying, streamlining, improving our path to the level above where we're going to be now. They have done that. I firmly believe that with Sabonis, unless they think he's going to leave in free agency, which I don't think he will. And then the Pacers, they wanted to begin anew. They wanted to go through the more gradual rebuilding approach that the Kings were no longer interested in. So that trade, of course, is a win for them, even though they don't, Tyrese Halliburton misses a ton of time. They're going to have another top lottery pick this year. Like, that is their end game. Because they didn't make the play, and that doesn't make this a failure at all. And I've seen like jokes being dragged about Tyrese Halliburton getting named an all-star. He was absolutely an all-star. He would have been an all-NBA player probably if he played in more games. So that's an example of a win-win, is because it fixed both teams' aims. And as I was going through this, and I think a more recent win-win, Rome said bonus points are not blow-up scenarios. The Cavs Jazz trade for Donovan Mitchell, yes, that was a blow-up scenario for the Jazz, but look how good they ended. Like, Larry Markkinen made an all-star team. He might make an all-NBA team. And so I think that certainly falls under the umbrella. So some of the ones that stood out, and this is tough. I'm sure I didn't go through all of them, but that trade between the Knicks and Bulls, what year was it? It was sometime it was 88, I think. The Bulls traded the Knicks traded Bill Cartwright, an 88 first-round pick, and an 88 third-round pick to Chicago for Charles Oakley, an 88 first-round pick, and an 88 third-round pick. Like, that's just a very interesting swap. And saying third round just feels really fucking weird. I think that ended up working out for both teams. So that would be one that stands out to me. This one is super interesting, and hat tip Greg Schwartz of Bleacher Report for it. The Phoenix Suns traded Charles Barkley and a 1999 second-round pick to the Houston Rockets for Sam Cassell, Robert Horry, Chucky Brown, and Mark Bryant. Barkley was past his prime at the time, but he still went on to have like great value when he ended up in Houston. He averaged 16 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists, and 1 steal over the 4 years in Houston, made an all-star team in 97, helped the Rockets get to 3 playoff appearances. And then Phoenix, though, ended up moving Cassell with Michael Finley to the Dallas Mavericks for Jason Kidd. And that ended up being huge for Phoenix, having Kidd there. So I would strike that as a win-win. Fantastic find to me by Greg Schwartz. I'm wondering if Lakers fans might push back against this one, but we can get into the nitty-gritty details of it. But Memphis trading Powell and in 2010 what was it, 2008? Was that year? Yeah, trading Powell in 2008 to the Lakers for the pick that became Marc Gasol. And I don't know if you would look at it differently, because that wasn't like the draft rights to Marc Gasol were not considered the meat and potatoes of that deal. You look at the 2008 first round pick was in there and a 2010 first round pick, but like, he ended up with Marc Gasol still. And so I would call that a win-win. He ended up being a part of the most successful era in Memphis Grizzlies history to date. You don't win a title, the Lakers win 2 with Powell. Still, like, I would classify that as a win-win. Another one that stands out, when the Lakers traded Shaq to Miami for Lamar Odom, Caron Butler, Brian Grant, and then the 2006 first round pick and the 2007 second round pick. I guess you could say Kobe and O'Neal wanting to stick together. How many titles would they won? Lamar ended up being one of the most versatile players in the NBA for the Lakers and was just absolutely monstrous for them. And if that relationship was going to continue deteriorating anyway, to get out of that situation with Lamar Odom, Caron Butler, Brian Grant, a first round pick, I thought that was really good value. And Odom ends up he was with the Lakers for 7 years, was just instrumental when you look at his versatility. And Caron Butler had the good one season in LA. And here's the other thing. Both of these teams ended up winning titles with members of the trade on their team after this trade. And so I think that just automatically counts as a win-win. I'm trying to think if there's any more recent, and this one I'm curious what people think about. I have the Pacers trading Paul George to OKC for Victor Oladipo and Sabonis. Because then look at what Victor Oladipo gave you. He became an all-NBA player for a minute, and we know injuries just sapped him of all value after that, but he became an all-NBA player for a minute. Then you have Sabonis, who helps keep you afloat, becomes your best player, And then you're able to use him to really jumpstart this rebuild with Tyrese Halliburton, where your future just looks so bright now between him and Turner and Benedict Mathurin, Andrew Nembhard, a ton of cap space, extra first-round picks, whoever you draft this year. So you're able to skip the rebuild, but then able to jumpstart when that didn't really bring you to a title level. And then OKC, I mean, I gave them a ton of credit for trading for Paul George when it wasn't guaranteed he would stay. You got to keep him, and then you were able to trade him for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and all the picks, because I don't remember who initially said this, but it's the best way I've ever heard of trading. Sam Presti found a way to trade Paul George and Kawhi Leonard while only having one of them on his roster. So I think that goes down as win-win. I don't know if that's controversial. And another one I've seen people think about is the Anthony Davis trade for New Orleans and the Lakers. The Lakers won a title, so you do that again. The Pelicans end up with Brandon Ingram, and that's, I guess you can count that as a blow-up scenario for New Orleans. They just got so much value out of that. You use Hart, he ends up getting you CJ McCollum. You didn't end up selling very high on Lonzo Ball, but he goes through those injuries. I don't know if I would throw that under, but that was one I kind of thought about, just because you got so much value and you're still going to reap the benefits of that value. And technically, those will be instrumental tools in, okay, like that's the reason you have Dyson Daniels. So I think it's fair to call it a win-win. Probably need to see more from the Pelicans, though, in terms of their core staying healthy before we go that route. I think I'm kind of out of suggestions there. I mean, you could get into, was the Kevin Love trade between the Cavs and the Timberwolves, did that end up being win-win in the long run? But steering clear of blow-up scenarios, which that clearly was for Minnesota. If anyone has any others, I'm sure there's others. Those are just the ones that sort of sprang to mind for me after digging around the NBA transaction vortex. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please, if you've made it this far and you haven't already, subscribe to us on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts. Leave some reviews on Apple. We've gotten a few negative ones, so if you can leave a 5-star rating and review, tell us what you like about the pod. Constructive criticism is fine. Join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast description and YouTube description. Follow us on the socials at HardwoodKnocks on Twitter and TikTok, at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. Shout out to every single one of you. I love everyone who listens to us, both recurring listeners and new listeners alike. Until next time, and as always, I leave you with a shout out to the one, the only, the indelible Frank Ntilikina, and also apologies sincerely to Jared Allen.